Great. So I'm going to start. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are in the world. We have a great audience today from everywhere, and we want to thank you so much for joining us. So my name is Priscila Negreiros, and I'm Associate Director at Climate Policy Initiative, where I lead the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, so the CCFLA Secretariat. For those that don't know us, we are one of the main global multi-level and multi-stakeholder coalition, and we are aimed at closing the investment gap for urban subnational climate projects. We work very global, but this year we are very, very happy to be launching our local CCFLA hub in Brazil. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual event for the fourth Financing for Development Conference, and the event entitled, as you can see in the slides, Finance for Urban Resilience, Sustainability Level of Public Investment in Cities and their alignment with the international commitments. This webinar is organized by the Ministry of Cities from Brazil with support from Climate Policy Initiative, the CCFLA, and the World Resource Institute from Brazil. So we're very happy to be with together with all these partners to talk to you today and listen from some of our experts. This session will be recorded and shared online for those that were unable to join us today. So don't worry if you need to leave us, you're definitely going to be able to hear till the end. So the Finance for Development Conference and today's webinar they come on a very, very important moment for urban areas. So many European cities, as I think some of you that are in Spain today, can feel the huge heat waves. I heard Sevilla it was yesterday around 54 degrees Celsius, which is very, very intense heat wave. And throughout the globe, global north, global south, we have seen floods, droughts, and many other extreme events that become more prominent. And this is particularly key for cities where most of the population is concentrated throughout the globe. So today we want to focus the discussions around urban climate finance with the growing appreciation that both financing needs and importantly the investment opportunities that cities present, and then trying to understand how all of that fit into the debate around resilience and adaptation to these extreme events. So in the CCFLA report from 2024, the State of Cities Climate Finance, we know that 831 billion US dollars was tracked flows was reaching cities, which doubled compared to the previous numbers that we had from 2017 and 18, and the 831 is from 2022, 2023. So we are seeing more investment going into climate more globally and broadly, but we still need to work a lot to close the investment gap and to meet the mitigation targets and the adaptation targets for the 1.5 pathway. So looking towards the outcomes of this conference that is happening right now in Sevilla, the COP30 in Belém with the leadership from the Brazilian government, there is a growing momentum to integrate cities' voices into those global discussions. So last week during London Climate Action Week, Bloomberg Philanthropies and the COP30 presidency, they announced a local leaders forum, this multi-day event in Rio dedicated to elevate city and subnational voices. So we are seeing very positive messages coming from Brazil and from COP and from other leaders. How can we integrate better cities into that debate? We know there are still urgent challenges that we need to face, particularly in having cities assessing finance. We want to discuss some of this today with you. And then we are delighted to have experts that have been working in this space from different perspectives, so we can try to discuss solutions in this webinar. So before we start the discussion with the experts, it's my pleasure to welcome two fantastic representatives from Brazil to provide the opening remarks for today's webinar. Our first speaker was recently appointed as the special envoy for COP30 for urban solutions and has been a leading voice highlighting the importance and potential that cities hold to address the climate crisis. So I'm very, very happy, Philip, to welcome you, Philip Young. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Priscila, for having me here, everyone, all the institution partners. You know, finance for urban resilience and adaptation is a key topic for a lower carbon economy and also for the success of COP30 in Belém. I was able to share with some of you last week in London. I really believe that the agenda we inherit from Baku, while very valuable, operates under a very low ceiling of ambition. It's a narrow frame, one that risks leaving COP30 empty of meaning. In this context, I really believe that if we are serious about avoiding a failed COP30, we must go beyond the current configuration of the agenda as it stands today. One obvious and necessary way forward is to inject fresh energy into the action agenda with new ideas, both concepts and transformative projects, engaging the private sector and civil society. But that's not necessarily enough. This moment also calls for a new, renewed normative agenda, one that would make emerge themes that make the urban agenda stand shoulder to shoulder with conventional ones. And here, I really believe that the urban agenda is the most urgent and promising new pillar of climate policy. And from Berlin to Baku, the urban agenda has been moving steadily from the margins towards the center. And in Berlin, it must reach the core. Now, on the topic today, I think the new tools in finance for urban resilience and adaptation can be the game changer for Berlin, for global climate policy, and well, for capitalism itself. I see a very intense agenda ahead of us in this panel, but I would like to draw your attention to a specific dimension that I believe to be one of the most pressing issues for solving the challenge of urban finance. Last week in London, I was very fortunate to join André Correia do Lago, the president of COP, in different rounds of talks with investors. One of the most common statements that we heard was that the finance world is bursting with cash that wants to tackle climate change, but do not find opportunities for allocation. This is so common. This is perhaps the most often statement that we heard. This is very curious because, on the other hand, we all know that most city governments lack the bandwidth to originate investable, bankable decarbonization and land generation projects. And the result is a double failure, a market failure, as capital markets can't price the early risk, and government failure that can't structure bankable projects. This is a recurring reality that I would urge you all to put energy to solve this dilemma. I know there are different facets, there are different fronts for the reflections, but this is the one that I would, invite you all to give focus on. As this is really a huge gap in the value chain of a net zero economy. And your action towards solving this dilemma would be really a great contribution to COP30 and climate urban action as a whole. So let me please stop here and wish you everyone on this panel a very productive and inspiring exchange. And I'll be around for exchanging ideas and working together towards the result of this meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Felipe. It's lovely to hear you again. And I think the challenges that you put it out for us to discuss during this meeting are very precise, because what we wanted to talk about was basically how can we discuss projects, bankable projects, how do we close that gap, right? Around hearing from investors, the money is there, hearing from the cities, we have the projects, but we're always dwelling in the middle. So what is the problem? And we hope to have answers and solutions today. And to continue this introduction, we would love to hear from Alice Carvalho, who is the special advisor to the Ministry of Cities in Brazil, to share more about the work from the ministry and what's the ministry doing to support Brazilian cities to improve their resilience. So Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Priscilla. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. First of all, on behalf of the Ministry of Cities, I would like to thank you, our partners who supported us in organizing this event, CPI, CCFLA, and WRI. Thank you, Priscilla, Henrique, and from my team, Ana Maria. I would also like to thank Philip Young, our special envoy for COP30 on the topic of cities, for his inspiring contributions. I would like to thank our next guest, who will provide different perspectives. So discussing financing alternatives for urban development is a crucial topic for Latin America, and especially for Brazil. Currently, 25% of Latin America's urban population lives in informal settlements or slums, and 77% of Latin Americans still lack access to safe sanitation. Considering these scenarios of our urbanization, discussing financing for urban resilience implies addressing the dimension of reducing inequalities and the demand for basic infrastructure. And this is a fundamental topic that the Ministry of Cities, since its recreation in 2023, has been dedicated to study, considering the fund gap we have and the challenges for the infrastructure to reach the diversity of municipalities in the country. We also consider the COP30 in Brazil as an opportunity for political engagement to advance on this topic. In Brazil, the urban agenda and the resumption of the cycle of public investment aimed at reducing the lack of urban infrastructure and advancing the resilience of cities materialized with the new Growth Acceleration Program, Novo PAC. Through the Ministry of Cities, at the Growth Acceleration Program, we are supporting now 2,600 projects through both reimbursable and non-reimbursable funding, organized under two main axes, water for all and sustainable and resilient cities. These initiatives cover essential infrastructure and show a multi-level governance model putting into practice the aim of CHAMP initiative, the Coalition for High Ambition of Multi-Level Partnerships. Together, these two axes represent about $18 billion in investments in water supply, sanitation, drainage, slope containment, solid waste management, public transportation, housing, and urban infrastructure in peripheral areas like slums. Even though we identify a deficit of about $10 billion in proposals that were not supported due to a lack of budget resources. On one hand, we need to expand access to credit for subnational entities, either through non-reimbursable resources from international funds, and for that, the country needs to be viewed as a recipient country, or through repayable resources, and for this, we need new guarantee instruments. A large number of municipalities, especially small and medium-sized ones, face fiscal constraints such as limited payment capacity or lack of real guarantees. Added to this, we must show the link between infrastructure, land use, social inclusion, and climate risk. Even though our programs require strong social and environmental impact, many proposals from local governments still need better technical quality. In particular, they often miss the climate adaptation strategies. To help with this, the Ministry of Cities offers technical support and training programs through our platform called Capacities. We are also helping 22 selected cities to improve their project, adding nature-based solutions and simple ideas for urban improvement. This is a partnership with the German cooperation, but we need to expand and scale. Many smaller cities in Brazil and worldwide face financial problems and can't offer guarantees to get loans. For them, accessing traditional finance is not realistic, even when they have clear needs and relevant projects. So we must work on that and include these municipalities in the path of climate financing. I would like to thank you and hope our guests will help us think of joint solution. Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you so much. And I think you already started highlighting a couple of the challenges that you are seeing from cities facing in Brazil. I think fiscal constraints, you mentioned, like how this needs to be linked to social issues, right? Like, and the work that the Brazilian government is doing. And I think you added two very important words like scale and expand. And I think the big challenge is around there. To try to respond to some of the points that you, Philip, brought it up on your opening remarks. We're very, very happy to have 5 very experts in this topic. And I'll mention all of them, and then we're going to start trying to tackle some of these questions that you have put it out for us. So we have Josué Tanaka, who among his many hats is a professor in this one from Graham Research Institute in LSE, the London School of Economics. We're very happy to have Alok Barno, who is the thematic lead on urban and infrastructure from JAF, the Global Environmental Facility. Also Elizabeth Arciniegas, who is a coordinator for subnational governments management of sustainable territorial development at CAF, Caja Andina de Fomento, which I definitely don't know the translation to English. But it's a regional multilateral bank, regional development bank in Latin America. Ariane Pevigi, who is the Blended and Climate Finance Director for the Mitsubishi Bank. And last but definitely not least, Henrique Evers, who is the Urban Development Manager at WRI Brazil. So we have all of these experts with different backgrounds and knowledge to try to answer a couple of the questions that we want to try to, I was going to say solve, but solve is always difficult, but at least touch base on this discussion. And then I'm going to start with the first question that I'm going to ask all of you. Maybe we can go through this order to make it simple. And the question is, so how can local investments be focused on key areas for increasing urban resilience? Meaning, from your perspective, how can we convince financial institutions, local governments, that we need to invest in urban resilience? And Josué, I will start with you.
Yes, hello everybody. So look, I think the first element of this is really awareness, right? And I think, highlighting, what the potential physical risks, of climate change are. In many cases, unfortunately, cities, financial institutions, people wait until the events happen, right? Such as a landslide, fires, Sevilla at 50 degrees plus, or, floods. People wait for that before actually acting, right? So I would say the first element here is, there needs to be what I would call a click, right? A click of awareness, as to, the extent and the trends, related to this problem. So as climate change is unfortunately moving forward, concrete evidence of this impact is spreading, getting more severe across an increasing number of cities. And therefore, I think that's probably why you are asking, the question. Perhaps once awareness is there, perhaps 2 elements that I could mention from a practical point of view, particularly from a financial point of view, which is one, mainstreaming resilience, through planning and investment preparation across sectors, right? So if you look at cities, buildings, transport, water, all of these to a certain extent, when you plan an investment, you should be thinking, about, the resilience aspect. So that's one track, right? Integrating this, mainstreaming this in the planning and investment preparation process. The second one is really reflecting priorities, specific priorities that an individual city may have in relation to generating, a specific investment plan and, a pipeline of projects, that will respond, to the, I would say, expected impacts of climate change, and therefore the expected preparation that needs to happen in relation to items such as, flood control, or sea level rise. Maybe in closing, I would also put a big point here about planning, right? Because in the end of the day, it's not just about trying to respond, to the issues, generated by cities the way they are today. It's also avoided the issues for tomorrow. What do I mean by this? Is really that land use control plans, for the development of cities should take into account, for example, floodplains, fire risks, sea level rise impact, so that you don't, in a way, on one hand, develop the city in certain directions, and then, have to deal, with the issues, of enhancing adaptation, once you already have, let's say a city that perhaps, is developing in a way that will increase, the adaptation and resilient costs in the future. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Josué. Alok, I'll jump to you. One, do you agree, disagree? But more than this, how can we convince institutions and such as Jeff, right, that have been working a lot with national governments that we should be working on cities on the same question?
Yeah, thanks, Priscilla, and great to be part of this panel. And we have a strong collaboration with Brazil, particularly with Ministry of Cities, in working on identifying financing opportunities. So really good to be here. I totally agree. In fact, I was just looking at my talking points, and it's not surprising that many of our talking points are aligned. I wanted to just re-emphasize the importance on integrated urban planning that Josué just mentioned. I think it's really important that we ensure that the solutions for adaptation and resilience benefit at the systems level in cities. And for that, integrated planning, considering different aspects of land use, is really, really important. Planning considers interconnections of resilience, and then identify solutions which also provides other urban services like mobility, jobs, and social benefits. And just wanted to highlight that this is really fundamental to the cities program that we support, and is one of the criteria and requirements. And it is not just like a requirement to constrain where our funding is going. It is a requirement because it maximizes impacts at a systems level, and also it allows linkages with local and broader national level land use and investment plans, which actually then leads to mobilizing more investments, and address the question that Philip mentioned at the beginning, that there is funding and cash available, but perhaps that linkage is not there. So I totally agree on this integrated urban planning aspect. And the second point that I wanted to mention is, on where we should focus. And one of the areas that we have been working with cities is on financing innovations. And, under that, just a couple of examples in Brazil, in Belém, where we are, working with UNEP to support developing a payment for ecosystem services scheme to conserve one of the state parks. And it actually aims to mobilize long-term resources to finance activities that will enhance the quality and quantity of water provision systems. And that is really vital for the resilience of the city. And we have been doing similar work in Argentina and many other countries. So, the idea is that, when you talk about convincing cities and national governments, it's basically offering them solutions. They are already convinced. I don't think we still need to convince cities that, why resilience is important, because given the damage caused by climate extremes, investing in resilience is essential for survival of many cities. Right? So it is given. What is really needed is supporting them through innovative business and financial models, providing support on addressing capacity gaps. What we have seen is that the project preparation support that has been provided, that is being provided by many facilities, has been effective. But at the same time, city-to-city exchanges, dialogues, and roundtables, and various other convenings that CCFLA has been also doing in close collaboration with our program Urban Shift has been very essential and has been proving very beneficial to many of the cities. So yeah, so in short, totally agree with previous speakers. And I think convincing is not really a challenge, but is the challenge is in developing solutions which can be really applied and which can be aligned with what cities' priorities are and what the global development priorities are.
Amazing, Alok. Thank you so much. So we all agree in integrated planning, we need to plan more. Although I have to say I agree with Josue, often it's the other way around. We leave the disaster and then we say, oh my God, now we need to plan. But, and I really liked your point, Alok, around convincing is already done. We need to actually go to the next step, right? Like show the results. Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you from a perspective of a multilateral development bank that has been working very actively in Latin America. How do you see this issue? Who do we need to convince or not? How the financial institutions are working in this space?
Hi, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to join you today. We from FfD, Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, work a lot with subnational governments and cities. And just 3 points that we wanted to share with you. The first one is that we see regional governments as a strategic priority for CAF. Our shareholders back in 2022 approved a historical capital increase of 7 billion, aiming to target this budget towards 2 main issues. The first one, becoming the green bank of the region, and this is reflected with a total up to 40% of the budget to be directed to green investment at subnational level. The second one, to work hand in hand with all the subnational governments in the region, to be a driver for regional integration and to be a catalyst of the non-sovereign sector. We believe that these goals of becoming the green bank and the subnational bank are deeply interconnected, because local governments are not only implementers, but more like innovators and agents of change. As Alice mentioned it before, the barriers that local governments face are real, are persistent, and are deeply structural. Many municipalities, especially those with the greatest need, are trapped in a cycle of underinvestment. They lack of fiscal space, technical capacity, and institutional support to access the financing that could transform their communities. For us to have this increasing in the capital has allowed us to approve more than 100 operations in the last 5 years, up to $9.5 billion in all of our shareholders' countries. And we want to become to accomplish all the investments that were put through as a target by our board. The decisions made today by the governments that are part of CAF, 23 countries in total, are supported by the board. Just a couple of days ago in Sevilla, we have the board meeting and we approved a lot of operations to support subnationals in the implementation of projects that go from inclusive housing, clean mobility for cities, green infrastructure, climate smart planning. We are not only protecting cities from future shocks, we are also creating opportunities to have better measures for them to become champions, allow them to create jobs and to attract investment. We have made a recent investment in Paysandú, Uruguay, which is a very, very small municipality and was very, very affected by some landslides. And we are pushing like an enormous efforts with some partners from private sector for them to invest. And we from CAF are financing a master plan for Paysandú to reactivate their economy. So there are specific measures, and we are working hand in hand with the subnational municipalities and regional governments in the region for them to become implementers. And from CAF, we assist them technically and financially to do so. I would like to expand my vision on the following round, but for now, that would be my intervention. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. Definitely, we can see CAF is convinced, meaning like becoming this green bank for the region, which is super interesting. And I think connecting what the previous speaker said, you are working on master plans too. So like the planning is embedded into the program, I think on your example on Uruguay. And I think you touched on something that we didn't hear before on smaller municipalities, right? Like, because there is a big difference around how this different types of actors tackle the issue of climate. I'll jump to Ariane, who comes from this commercial bank side. I think you're part of the people that like Philip heard during London Climate Week saying that investments are there. But we'd love to hear your experience and what the Mitsubishi Bank has been doing, and how, I think first, I would love to ask you, how do you convince a bank such as the Mitsubishi Bank, the biggest bank in Japan and internationally present, to actually work on the municipal and adaptation space? And if you could tell us a bit like about this.
Yeah, I will start saying that I'm of the view, I don't agree a lot with many investors when they say that there is no investable projects. I do think, and like this is now my advice to the people who are on the project proponent side, is that when we're talking about investors, the universe is so big. You have entities like Mitsubishi, who are large commercial banks. And although we have a bank in Brazil, we don't operate on the retail side. We're looking at infrastructure projects. So what is bankable for me is not bankable for a small asset manager, or is not investable for Itaú or Bradesco. So I think that this discussion, and this is a missing middle between the cities and everyone who is preparing the projects and the actual sources of financing that are available to them, so that they can have a guiding north of how they are preparing their project, what are the sources of financing they can think of, because that influences a lot how you're designing a project from the financing structure side. On the side of urban resilience and adaptation, I think we're talking about awareness and what Josué said. And this is an anecdote that I use within my bank a lot, which is we are all banks are already financing adaptation. You just don't know it. And I'll use the case of I'm Brazilian. My father lives in a small municipality called Redenção da Serra, where close to Ubatuba, there have been many landslides in the past 3 years. My dad was really scared when he saw that could happen in his land. He then took out a commercial loan from a large Brazilian bank to build a defense wall. And the groundskeeper, Seu Zé, who lives on the farm, has built canaletas all over the hill and planted some bushy trees, according to him, who have strong roots and won't let the landslide. And I was telling my dad, I was like, I'm taking you to COP. You guys have just designed great infrastructure with nature-based solution. So Itaú is financing adaptation. They just don't know it. According to them, they just gave my dad a commercial loan. So I think that change of mindset, of understanding elements of the project, and one other really big selling point for investors in terms of urban resilience and those elements in a project when we're evaluating a project is that adaptation, we think about it, it's the cost of not having it. Because everyone keeps saying there's no monetization, there's no cash flows, but it's the cost of not having. So we do use a lot of investment in adaptation in the narrative that is almost like an insurance investment that you're making. Whatever that costs more at the capex project, at the capital expenditure of a project, there is triple dividends in terms of the resilience of that of whatever the project asset is being designed. So those are my few points. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing this story. Particularly, I think two of your points, right? Like we are actually investing into adaptation. Maybe we're not able to identify as such, but we already have, and probably this happens in smaller towns, and like how can we actually understand and give like more support for this kind of investment and the cost of not investing. And I think your last, which is tricky, but I'm certain that you're going to have very interesting example for us on how you have been working with cities in Brazil on different areas, particularly nature-based solution, where I know that WRI is doing a lot of work. So how are you bringing this topic forward, and based on what you hear from others, like what are your reactions?
Yeah, exactly. It's tricky to be the last one, but I was expecting it. So I will maybe bring some examples or opportunities, or maybe some details on things that the other speakers already talked about. But first, of course, the most convincing thing, or the awareness, or how to raise this awareness that Professor Josué was mentioning, is unfortunately the emergency. Unfortunately, the real impacts and the losses that we actually actually feel is the most convincing way. But the problem is that when that happens, and you mentioned that too, Priscilla, when it happens, we are usually not prepared, not just for the impact of the disaster, but how to react to it, and to rebuild or to build differently. So we are in a huge risk of entering in the climate emergency mindset, and responding to that with our former ideas of what is infrastructure. So Ariane just mentioned exactly when very it's a perfect example of how we are biased to respond to that with past mindsets. So this is a huge risk, but the most convincing way to advance the agenda is unfortunately what we are feeling in our real lives. Second, and again, reacting to Ariane's points, a few weeks ago, WRI just launched research that shows that investing $1 in adaptation can yield more than $10 in benefits over 10 years. This is a report called Strengthening the Investment Case for Climate Adaptation, a triple dividend approach that was just mentioned, and it goes beyond the avoided losses, which is one of these dividends, but also brings the benefits or the returns on the social, the economic, the environmental, and the health returns of investing in adaptation. The report is not just about urban adaptation, but had some examples, including one example in Fortaleza that was analyzed. That's one of the examples. But this brings the triple dividend argument that can help us to also bring this awareness and convince. And lastly, just bringing some opportunities, because I do believe that mainstreaming into planning, into action, into the public government mindset, it's key. Maybe most of the speakers talked about municipal planning or integrated urban planning. I wanted to highlight the national level programs and plans. I think the climate federalism and all the CHAMP and governance programs that are being pushed forward are a great opportunity to advance that on how to mainstream urban adaptation into national level programs like integrated plans like Plano Clima and the sector investment programs that we are seeing, but also informing the new Brazilian country platform, BIP, if it focuses on enabling the conditions for urban adaptation and providing the right elements to it. So it's an open opportunity.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Enrique. And I think you touched on an interesting place, because we started with Josué on integrating planning reinforced by Alok and by the others, but integrating planning locally, but also nationally, right? Like, so how to integrate urban into national plans that and into national funds. And I think Alicia also mentioned a couple of examples from Brazil. we're gonna touch on, we're gonna do round two, and I'm gonna like change you a bit the order so we don't have Henrique always as last. But then maybe Ariane, I will go to you because I think you mentioned a bit of these points from our next question, which is how can financing reach municipalities that struggle with funding requirements? And then I think you mentioned very clearly funding requirements are very different depending on the funder. But what can they do if they see these budgetary and technical constraints? And just before you come in, everyone that is participating with us, if you want to ask questions, I see that some of you already did. Please add to the questions and answer box in Zoom, and we're going to try at the end to respond to some of them. I cannot promise, but we're definitely going to try. But Ariane, to you.
Again, another anecdote. I'm originally from a town called Taubaté. Whoever are Brazilians in the call will know Taubaté is famous for a number of not very fun things, but is that my town has actually had a loan from CAF in 2017, which was a loan for infrastructure against floods, and my town has defaulted on that loan. And it had a guarantee from the sovereign who has been paying CAF, I hope, Elizabeth. And that's the big discussion around it. And this is the part of like, okay, so how do you work with municipalities who have budget constraints? And again, I think that then this is a good thing about the financial sector, especially the international financial sector, is that it's very colorblind in the sense that it sees risk and return and tries to do an equation of it. So it doesn't really, the question of municipalities is only about the risk that municipalities pose. So it is all about allocation of risk and then how can that be mitigated. And I think that that's the key point we can elaborate on municipalities. I think, for instance, in the case of Brazil, what has happened with the regulatory framework for sanitation and then the flooding of international investments there. And then you had the first wave of the international direct investment through the companies who were bidding for the concessions that are at municipal level. And then you had the backing of financial institutions like ourselves backing those institutions. And then you create a virtuous cycle of financing, where not necessarily I'm lending to a municipality, but I'm supporting an entity that is working in a municipality. And there you could see with the new regulatory framework, with the tariff schemes and the concession agreement, it was able to then bridge the risk that the private sector was not willing to take at municipal level sanitation. I think that's a very good example and a great success story that Brazil should really tell everyone. So with risk and allocation, we can, and I know I only have 3 minutes, but we can discuss partnerships where we are partnering with the federal government to mitigate certain risks, if it's guarantees for non-payments or if it's the project doesn't get concluded. So you can look at a support from the central government, or also then you have a number of multilaterals that, as and has been mentioned, that want to mobilize more capital, where those multilaterals would have an appetite to take a bigger or riskier position than the private sector. So I think we need to think, and I work with blended finance, which is to blend the different sources of capital for a purpose. So the first question I would say the municipality should try to answer is, what am I trying to solve and what don't I have? And I think entities like CCFLA and there are many other networks of municipalities do a great job of explaining those concepts for the municipality, so they are not just very lost in this journey by themselves. I think that's also an important thing that ends up being a burden at the municipality, which I think we have the tools to start solving now. Thank you.
Amazing, Ariane, and I think you mentioned risk, right? Like, so I think part of the big answer you gave us is like how can they struggle meeting the requirements, so like actually analyzing better their risks. And Elizabeth, I'm going to turn to you, particularly because CAF was mentioned, and we all hope Taubaté is doing well. Great city. I'm from the state of São Paulo, so I can say that I quite like Taubaté. But then to you, under like thinking on solutions and on the spirit that Alok brought up, right? Like we need to bring cities concrete solutions, not to convince them. So like how CAF has been working with this issue is that a lot of cities in the region that you work in do have technical constraints and budgetary constraints.
Yeah, thank you, Priscilla. I think that it's very important to mention that CAF has evolved from a traditional sovereign lender to a key player in non-sovereign and quasi-sovereign financial, which marks a pivotal shift on this risking and market scenario that Ariane was mentioning. We today have like a diverse suite of financial products that looks to empower subnational entities to access capital markets and implement transformative projects. I will just mention like four main solutions and instruments that we are deploying now to work with subnational entities in the region. The first one is technical assistance. We provide structured support for project preparation, including feasibility studies, but also are supporting incubation and acceleration financing, which is risk because for us, the ideal scenario is to finance or give technical support to the projects that are just like in the last mile to accomplish or be bankable projects. But last year, we approved a facility named FAFIS, which was like the facility for subnational acceleration and incubation, and it was approved like up to $4.5 million. We allocated those resources in less than 6 months. So there are projects to be financed, but the level of maturity it's very diverse. So you can find like the projects that are already to be financed with one feasibility study, and then you are also trying to support projects that maybe need to be accompanied for more than 1 year. So for us as a bank, the question was, we want to invest in this now and maybe find a bankable project in a 2-year period or more. The answer was yes. We want to invest in supporting these projects that are maybe at not the best level possible, but we are taking like the risk to do it. And for this year, we have doubled the facility for up to $8 million because we want to work with these small municipalities such as Paysandú, Pichincha, Guayas in Ecuador, Rio Negro in Argentina, and those that are really like in the lowest case scenario for any investor. And we are also keeping the track to invest and work with the usual suspects for financing: Bogota, Quito, those with the higher capacities and the best budgets, and the ones that would deploy, for example, green bonds, emissions, etc. We are also working with partners with the UN Global Commission for Urban SDGs Finance in trying to develop a guarantee mechanism for subnationals. This is not an easy task. We were asked to have results in a 6 months period of time, and we said, okay, we need more time because this hasn't done before, and this would be like of greater risk for CAF and other banks that would like to invest on a green guarantee for subnationals. But we are trying to figure it out, like how can we unlock financing for municipalities with lower credit ratings. This credit worthiness, low credit worthiness is really, really important factor for us to work with. But at the same time, we are also trying to see how can we better work with the capacity building and to support the municipalities and regional governments with their strengthening, to see if they need to have more specialized profiles to deliver a very essential task for them to support all the for the beginning to the end, how to create design a project, how to accomplish all the phases for a government to give a guarantee or not. In Colombia, we have a new portfolio of working with no guarantee with some regional governments, and this can be a pilot for us up to 200 millions with some departments as Valle, Cali, Cartagena, Santa Marta, that are medium-sized cities. We are giving all the technical support for them to accomplish all the steps that need to have to access non-credit guarantees. So we will see how it works. We have been working with them for the last 8 months now, and we'll see at the end of the year what does it happen. The IDB is starting a new project to work with cities without guarantee, and they are piloting also. So this is like, you have to try, and then we will see if it is feasible to scale it up or not. Just those are my few points on this second intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You mentioned a very interesting one. So like project preparation technical assistant as a risk investment, right? Like I liked a lot this framing. And then I think Ariane had mentioned federal government as a guarantee, but in the case you cannot. So like, how do you create a facility that could serve that purpose, which is a very interesting example. José, I'll jump to you, because I think you have a lot of example within the system, right? Like working with cities and national governments. And if you can comment on this question for cities that are struggling to find the money. And
sure. Thank you. And I just wanted to say on that I did look where Rede Soda Serra is, you know, so like this, I'm now fully informed where José has done his work. Now, look, first of all, not to be boring, but I think, you know, there is a point here that has to be made, that there is no magic wand, and that there are some fundamentals, you know, that have to be looked at, you know, that essentially, you know, are a basis for any further consideration of instruments, you know, whether public, private, PPPs, etc. So what do I mean by this? The fundamentals is really, first and foremost, what is, you know, the strengths of the local financial base, you know, in a city? You know, what are the tax powers? What are the user charges? What are the intergovernmental fiscal transfers? You know, if you have none of these, you know, it's going to make the choice or the lack of choice of instrument quite clear, right? It will have to be, you know, some form of public investment, you know, through probably, you know, national budget allocations, and that's it. So this, I think, is a key point. And I think it's also important in terms of some of the basics, you know, to also see that, unfortunately, the world being complicated, you know, aspects such as user charges, you know, which are key drivers of revenue flows of what the private sector, for example, would be looking at. You know, what is the level of cost recovery? You know, what is the ability, you know, of, you know, tariff adjustments? And as you know, no mayor likes, you know, to increase the tariffs for anything, right? So these realities, you know, have to be looked at, not to speak even of the social implications, you know, that tariff, you know, increases have. So again, I'm just mentioning this because, you know, this notion of local finance capacity, you know, is a key determinant in terms of being able to answer, you know, the question that you've asked, you know, about what are the instruments. I think the other point has been emphasized very much by Elizabeth, you know, on the capacity building. I would just put one more emphasis on the tail end. I mean, Elizabeth did mention, you know, this aspect, you know, across the whole chain, but I do put a point very much on implementation, which is often forgotten. people feel, let's sign the loan, let's get the financing. And once you have the commitment, people open, a bottle of whatever drink, is drunk, in the thing. But implementation in many cases, particularly with limited capacity, means that if you don't give attention to that, you actually don't accomplish any impact or very limited impact. Then to go very quickly, once you have this question of local financial base and have a feel as to, what are the possibilities that you may have, well, that's where you can see, in a way, the role of different players, right? The role of development banks, like CAF, and Elizabeth has really given, I would say, a good view of what that can be, and also has shown something which I think is very interesting, which is, the evolution of the product range, right? That if you looked at development banks originally, okay, it was sovereign loans and that's it, right? Little by little, you move and evolve the product. Now, having in a way been the grandfather of the EBRD grid finance program, for example, if we move to the non-sovereign finance, right, which is an area which often gets mayors very excited because they say, finally, the institution is going to work directly with me. Okay, I think it's very important to mention, that yes, CAF or EBRD or the private sector, by the way, can work directly, with the municipality, but that will put a lot of pressure on the due diligence of the first aspect I meant, right? What is the local finance capacity of that city, right? And in some cases, I don't want to say in many, but depending in the countries, it actually be, it will be many, that in some cases, it will actually be probably simpler for a city to go through some form of sovereign finance, that's intermediated, etc., rather than to go the direct route, particularly if, again, the local financial base is limited or constrained. And finally, for the private sector, I would say, yes, there are obviously opportunities, but I go back to the point essentially about user charges, about tariffs, because these, at the end of the day, are really key determinants, of the profitability of a project, which then goes back to Ariane's first point, because that's the mantra that, private sector, which is the risk-return equation, right? And so, therefore, the strength and the credibility, of the tariff evolution is essentially the key element of the return part, and any form of uncertainty then is translated into the risk element. So I could go on and on, but I stop here just with some remarks in relation to your interesting question. Thank you.
And a good remarks, and I think the conclusion is there's no free lunch, right? So definitely, if we want a direct loan, we need to actually be ready to do it. We need to have the enabling environment. We need to deal with the question of raising tariffs or not. And all of these options have good and difficult bits,
Priscilla,
right?
perhaps I would perhaps say the analogy here is probably there is no free ride rather than lunch. But that's just a side comment.
That's a good one. It's a good one. So Henrique, based on the no free ride or lunch, whatever you prefer, you have been working with bigger and smaller municipalities. Can you tell a bit of your experience on how cities have been dealing with this issue, right? To get access to investments.
Well, yeah, that's exactly the point. If you look at Brazil, we need to be honest. There's a huge limited fiscal capacity. So the challenge is around that. How can we maneuver or find ways? But mostly, and maybe my point here in this discussion would be about understanding that differences. I mean, cities often can't borrow in Brazil. If we look at the 5,550 municipalities that we have in Brazil, how many are able to actually access these complex, costly, long-term loans that many times we're talking about? So one way to solve that is to work with the intermediaries, the national and subnational banks that can play a role to access these international funds, or more business as usual ways to solve it through direct transfers from the federal government or national investments or own resources, right? Because it is also important. But I think the point here is to think about what are these municipalities, why we want them to reach finance, or what kind of finance, and what should be their priorities for climate action. I mean, there's so many questions that we need to answer before trying to get the solutions internally, because I believe that the solutions are very different for the different sizes of cities, but also the different challenges that they face. And that's why I believe that it's important, and we are trying to push that forward with the Ministry of Cities. It's a discussion about a typology of cities linked to investment priorities that brings the climate and especially climate threats, and crossing that with fiscal capacity or credit rating, but also the types of priorities that they need and want to push forward. Only with that, I believe we will be able to actually create effective strategies for making them reach financing.
Super interesting, trying to understand a bit better the cases from city, and instead of responding largely to a big solution, like understanding their specificities. And Alok, this finished with you, but I'd love to hear your thoughts around the challenges that the cities are facing and presenting around their budgetary and technical limits.
Yeah. Thanks, Priscilla. I think quite useful insights have already been shared. I think we need to look at this constraint or the lack of flow from both demand side and supply side of financing. So, on the supply side, we have MDBs, multilateral climate funds like the GEF, which can, provide support to municipalities and cities in addressing their local priorities, which are also directly linked with national goals and international and global goals. So, in that context, I would say that things have progressed a lot, and your reports have also indicated that the flow of finance for urban investments has been increasing. We have so far provided nearly $500 million in grants to cities and city-focused investments. Many MDBs are now working with subnational governments, and the previous speaker just mentioned a new subnational financing window by IDB, which is also quite encouraging to see that there have been a lot of international efforts now to address some of the capacity and budgetary constraints in cities. But cities in countries, they largely depend on national transfers, right? And they work within their established governance structure. So it's really important that within that system, there are reforms, there are innovations, and the multi-level governance is strengthened to support this flow of finance and address these gaps. And we are seeing that this is happening, and many of cities, part of our program, are actually taking quite a good leadership on this. In Brazil, Elise at the beginning mentioned the Capacidades platform of the Ministry of Cities. Our project City Nova with UNEP has been actually supporting that platform, which is actually training municipalities in accessing financing from the national government and from international sources, and supporting supporting dialogues which can help them, not just the local government, but also the national governments adapt their regulatory frameworks and enable metropolitan entities to access financing. In Argentina, we have been working with the national government and many cities, and engaging the national development banks. I think one of the speakers mentioned it, to orient them about looking at cities more holistically and creating dedicated credit lines for sustainable urban investments focusing on sustainability and climate resilience, and also at the same time working with cities in improving their fiduciary management and credit ratings. So there are several examples which are showing that there are efforts to bridge this constraint. I think what is really important is that the efforts which are coming from different sides, they need to be more collaborative, so that cities can receive more comprehensive support, because not everyone can do everything, but everyone knows what needs to be done. So that kind of collaboration can really address the challenges and the issue that you just raised about cities struggling due to their budget and technical constraints. So I'll stop there, and happy to learn more on what others are doing. There are several reports also published. I was recently looking at a World Bank publication on banking on cities, which also touches on this part, and I think there are really useful insights from there. One of the findings that struck me was about the MDB debts and other financing that is going to countries. Not much is directly being used by cities. So are there mechanisms, are there innovations around that? We have one project with ADB in India, in Chennai, where our grant funding is directly complementing a city-based financing, and with focus on nature-based solutions. So there is a momentum, but I think this is an area where a lot of work is still needed. But we are moving in a positive direction. So on that positive note, I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Alok. And I think you already started answering part of like the last round of questions we had, which is, okay, can you bring forward based on your experiences, how we are working on project preparation, right? Like, so how are you talking to the cities, or have been working and you have experience around this quality and detail required to prepare projects, to have access to national or even international funding? And this goes into, I was reading also the questions that we received a lot. I don't know, by the way, if you managed to, very, very good and interesting questions. And it goes into one that has, like, from a small city that I'm looking at here, that is like, it's basically a similar question. So like, how can I ensure the project that I'm structuring is good? And then how can I find the funding for it, right? Like, where should I go? And then I think I would love to hear this from the panelists, your experience around both. So like, how have you been supporting cities on project preparation? How do you, like, how cities can have access to funders nationally or internationally? Where should we go? Henrique, I'll start with you this time. So
okay, it is good, because maybe I'll be a bit pessimist. But I will tell you a story, because it just reinforces this point about the diversity of cities and the type of cities that we have, and how actually the main point is that a good project isn't enough. And that's the fundamentals that Professor Josué was mentioning. You can have a very good project, but this is not a guarantee that you get the fund. So we keep hearing that the funds are available and we don't have the good projects. That's also true, but that's not entirely true. And I tell you how we've been working. We launched this Urban MBS Accelerator, where we supported 10 cities in Brazil, cities that are small and mid-sized, to advance these nature-based solution projects, which is, on top of that, nature-based solutions are quite innovative in terms of implementation, so we don't have a huge track record, and so it even increases the risk related to it. Well, the technical systems provider, I can say that was really successful. I can assure that at least 10 out of these, at least 8 out of these 10 projects are quite good and not ready for investment, but ready to advance it. But the real results that we are having is that only 4 of them got funds, which I think it's a huge success rate for this kind of project preparations. But anyways, only 4, but partially. And the 4, the funding source is the same, and it's national government non-reimbursable funds. And we are supporting the negotiations for the rest of it that are loans with development banks. So these are ongoing discussions, and over the time that changes. So one city, for instance, got downgraded in the credit rate analysis. So now the conversations are kind of blowing. So it's really hard to advance only with technical assistance. So that's why we need to work in parallel and in the demand side, but also on the supply side of the credit, with credit reform, with regulatory reforms, but also changing the way that we look at the cities and the projects that they have, and the kind of investments that we are providing and to whom. Because if we spend out all of our non-reimbursable funds from the federal government with São Paulo, Salvador, Rio, we will be reaching very huge amounts of population, and that's probably one of the reasons that we invest that. But we are draining the funds for the smaller cities, and how we deal with them. So it's a really hard question to balance. But trying to finish with a more positive note. In spite of that, I still believe in a centralized technical assistance, and like a creation of new projects centralized in the government. So as we can provide more at scale and centralized technical assistance for creating the pipeline of projects, and then following up the execution and implementation of these projects that also Josué mentioned. So I still believe this is one of the ways forward that also requires investment. So it should be part of the equation of investing on creating that type of technical support, maybe prioritizing the smaller cities. So again, the same question: who will be receiving that kind of support and why?
Henrique, I don't think it was negative, because everything is life is perspective, right? Like a lot of project preparation facilities do develop project and they don't get any funding. So from 10 to 40%, I think it's good news. The question is, which I agree with you, it's like how this is sustainable, because is the vision and like thinking about the concessional financing globally, is it sustainable that we're going to have grants for everyone that actually needs? And then Josué, then I will jump to you, because I think you have been working, also trying to answer more globally this question, but would love to hear your thoughts on the question, and maybe comment on what Henrique just said.
Yeah, Henrique gave a good base, to think about this. So I'll first start with a bit of a provocative one, which perhaps betrays my past working, in a development bank, which is that particularly for large projects, I think that project preparation that is done outside the financial institution often ends up frustrating for all. It's frustrating for the funder, in many cases a donor. It's particularly frustrating for, I would say, the mayors and the cities, because they go through all the effort of the technical and financial, then perhaps approach a financial institution, and then each financial institution will want to do its financial due diligence in accordance, with their practice. And so, what happens in those bigger projects is that the financial institution restarts asking all kinds of questions, often new questions, or sometimes, repeating again what's been done before. So the first part of the answer I would put there is really perhaps to have, and Henrique in a way already alluded to that when he made the differentiation, with smaller projects, in smaller cities. But certainly for bigger projects, bigger sustainable infrastructure projects, transport, water, etc., my advice is very much to try to connect with a financial institution interested in that area, and then see what are the possibilities, to work on project preparation. Now, that then means in many cases that you're talking about development banks, right? Because unless Ariane has some surprise, from FUSG or knows something about some other competitor in the private sector, that tends to be a big issue in private banks because, they all look at their cost ratios and, generally you will not have, resources in a private bank to do project preparation. So that's where, I would say the work that Elizabeth or the work that Alok, with Jeff resources, can do, can be very helpful in that context, right? In the sense of having project preparation that is funded, but already, within the context of a financial institution. So hopefully you avoid, the double or triple process, that I alluded to at the beginning. So that's for, I would say, the bigger projects, right? Standalone, if you want, investments, the type of things that you could present, to Ariane, for example, to examine a possibility of a private finance or part private finance. Then, not to be too long, I would say for smaller cities and smaller projects, at least my own practice has been these things tend to be better done in kind of programmatic approaches, sometimes at national level, in which, you have to a certain extent a relatively standardized process, in which, you have a bit of a check and box, and in which essentially, the financial due diligence that you do may be much lighter than what you need to do, for a bigger project. Okay. So again, I could again go on and on because it's a topic of 25 years of work, but I'll stop here just to make again, this differentiation, and particularly again, I would conclude here because by saying, really having a process that avoids the frustration of multiple due diligence cycles. Thank you.
Great, amazing. Thank you so much, Josue, for the experience, and that happens a lot, right? Like because the cities having to go through different project preparation facilities, different processes, end up having many projects that don't go out from their wardrobe or having to deal of that many times. Elizabeth, love to hear your thoughts over this issue and around project preparation. And you mentioned a couple of times, which is very interesting, that CAF has been working with smaller towns, right? Like, so the Josue's second example. So like how CAF has been working as an MDB in this space.
Yeah, just to mention like a couple of examples and following up on Professor Tanaka and Enrique, this huge work of who do you work with and how to keep different tracks, like with the traditional lenders, you have one track, they prepare the projects and they present the projects, and you have like a portfolio defined each year. It's part of your pipeline for you to deliver and do things together. But then you have other tracks. Some of them are like in this midterm scenario where you have to put additional financing and technical assistance for them to grow and to reach financing either from this bank or other banks. But then you have a third track where you have to put more work and to build up knowledge together, because sometimes it's not that they don't know how to do it, you don't know how to do it either. And I think to put like you as the lender or the bank or the counterpart in a level where you can learn and support that growth, it's important. It's not just a relationship like you are up and the others are down, because I think at the end of the day, this is like, how do you build up trust, and you can put you in a vulnerable spot as well. So for us has been very interesting to work, for example, with Chile, where the regional governments are not allowed to access direct credits, but following up on this multi-level governance approach that Aloke was mentioning before, we are working with the national government on 80 million project to support the strengthening of regional governments in Chile, and to start analyzing how can they prepare the projects and access credit. It is like a complex way to do it, but for us to work hand in hand with each one of the 16 regional governments in Chile has let us learn a lot as well. So this is like a challenge that are embracing. We have already approved this program within our internal board, and are working with the Ministry of Finance on which is the best way to deploy it. So it will be like the first time that the regional governments in Chile will access technical and financial assistance through a credit that will be supported by a guarantee of the national government. The other case I wanted to mention here, it's related with the implementation challenge that was mentioned by Professor Tanaka. We have been working with Guayaquil, Ecuador, for several years. This year, we approved the 17th program, and we started building up the capacity for them to deliver some key projects regarding strategic infrastructure, climate resilience, sustainable urban development, and they have been learning a lot, and they have been strengthening their capacities, and now they are able to deliver just a big projects for themselves, and they just want us to accompany them from a financing perspective, but this was a process, a 9-year process, and now they can run all the investments themselves. So it's, how do you see this midterm or long-term work with municipalities? It's key, and don't lose like the vision of all the tracks that you are handling, because you don't have to put all your eggs on the same basket, because you have different kind of clients, and it's for you a challenge to see how do you deliver what they need, and not for all of them to adjust for what you have. That would be for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. To put a quick question in this space, right? Like being demand driven, or like listen to what the investor wants and what comes first, and how can you deal with that contradiction? I'm gonna pull Ariane, because I think, like, as we're discussing project preparation, and I have to say that I heard you speaking very, very well in other panels. So I'm gonna steal your line, saying that commercial banks don't often invest into project preparation. Not necessarily, it's not their expertise, right? Like, they're investors. So, but how do you see that, like, that role within a commercial bank perspective, thinking that it's going to be hard to actually have any investment if we don't work on that space? And then I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's just taking a step back, and for MFG, we've been in a journey of blended finance, and I think blended finance has been happening for decades in developed and developing countries. I think it's more something that the past 10 years, it has become its own thing. So we've been on the journey of setting up blended finance as its own unit. And one of the things that we understood from the beginning is exactly this point of it won't work like any other products where we just have a wish list and the project comes and you tick the box. Does it meet this? Yes, no, gets through investment committee and we lend. We would have to take a different approach. And then I think it's where it touches to the crux of project preparation. Currently, MFG, we are launching a fund that has the GCF, Climate Fund Managers, the Global Affairs Canada, and FinDev Canada in the fund for subnational investments in climate adaptation. Brazil was not selected because it was considered to be too high income, and it's focused on LDCs and SIDS. But there, my pipeline, after 2 years, the pipeline got to 2,615 transactions, out of which 4 are in a last mile technical assistance stage. And then this is something we realized, okay, we can't just be sitting and waiting for the bankable projects to come out of thin air. And this is the part where it's true, Josue. I wish MFG had a bucket for project preparation. I was trying to think to make this point to management, but I don't think it's going to fly as we're a bank. But what we've seen is establishing the relationships early on with the entities that do that. And I think that that's really key, because then you create an ecosystem that becomes more orderly. And we work with CCFLA. I think the PPF connector is like the 8th wonder of the world. We really like that consolidation of pipeline. But then we can very early on come in and demonstrate what we need for a project. And then the project preparation facilities, the teams that are on the ground, can take this into consideration, so that exactly what Josue said, I was smiling, it's exactly this. They do all this work, and then I have to come in and ask the same questions. And then if a project is already designed with a think of like, okay, we're targeting to go for a private financing, or no, we're going to go, as Enrique was saying about national transfer, that also saves everyone's time on how you design the project, because you can't build a bridal dress if you don't know who your bride is. And then trying to build something that will fit everyone, it's just too much burden on the team. So I think this has been one of the successes we've been having, is partnering with those entities, so that we can identify the pipeline even before it's investable, and we can do like a follow-up process until we can graduate to a stage where we can pick up for DD.
Amazing, Ariane. Super, super interesting. I'll jump straight to Alok. And Alok, I left you as last, not as a coincidence, but I think Enrique started talking about grants, the limitation of that, and how can we try to find other solutions. I think Jeff has been exploring this space. So if you could tell us a bit around this on project preparation. I think it has to be fast because we have 2 minutes. And I love, as Philip stayed with us till the end, to put him on the spot to hear some of your reflections over everything you heard and how we're going to implement that into COP. But so Alok and then Philip.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Just to reinforce that it's not just about quality of projects, it's also about the readiness of institutions, which is equally important if we are talking about securing national or international funding. So just wanted to reinforce that. Coming to the projects, I think, I'll just go back to my comment made in the previous round about collaboration between different facilities, which I know CCFLA has been doing a great job there. Our platforms, Urban Shift, Global Platform for Sustainable Cities, we have been doing through these platforms, also bringing different funds, facilities together. I just wanted to, because I have been trying to be positive in my comments, just wanted to share an example of a positive solution of collaboration where we worked in Argentina in Buenos Aires, where Urban Shift, the ICLES TAP, the project preparation facility, and the GAP fund, we all collaborated. We collaborated at a very early stage in the city, which actually enabled Buenos Aires to, so through Urban Shift, we identified the city, we worked with them, we connected them with ICLES TAP at the same time, which provided them the technical support in preparing project. And the GAP fund then came in and took the project and prepared a comprehensive urban mobility plan for investment. So I think these kind of collaborations are really the key. Often as one of the speakers earlier said, that you develop a project and then towards the end you try to look for financial institutions. So that often doesn't work. So it's really important that some of the potential financial institutions are identified at the early stage, so that all the support that is, or all the efforts that are being made for quality is actually realized, and the impact is is visible and is delivered to the people in cities. So with this positive example and being conscious of time, I'll give the floor back to you, Priscilla. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Alok, and we love to finish in collaboration. I'll thank you all the panelists that were with us, and Philip, I'll leave you the last words from today, thinking on, we had a lot of interesting ideas, discussed project preparation, challenge, thought about some solutions. How can we have your leadership under the COP presidency to help us leave some of those messages and actually look for the implementation on the ground? And thank you everyone that joined us today. Philip, to you.
Thank you so much. After so much I heard and so much I learned, I don't know whether I can make a statement. I think I do some rambling if you have the patience to hear me a little bit. My attempt here is to sort of wrap my initial inquiry about project preparation. There is I cannot help but to think that there is a huge gap in project preparation. My reality, from my viewpoint, is still very diffuse, and I don't see anything really working on the scale that we need. But my hope is that really, from what I saw from philanthropists, from agencies, development agencies, multilateral banks, I think the gap in project preparation needs to be led by commercial banks on a system that involves blend finance. But I think my hope is that commercial banks take the lead. And let me take the example that Ariane told us about the supposedly, I think it's a good example of the Brazil finding the way through the sanitation project. I think it was great. I think perhaps commercial banks got involved simply because they were financing not the public sector directly, but the concessionaire of the services. This makes things much easier because you are actually in the end financing a company, right? And there are guarantees that are provided. This is a mechanism that is clear. And the project preparations is easier in the sense that it doesn't involve too many stakeholders in the conception of the whole engineering process that a sanitation process involves. This is one thing. The other thing is that, well, we hear a lot about energy transition in the overall lower carbon economy context. I would like to invite you all to think of land transition. This is a key for, after all, cities are land, right? So peoples are agglomerating on land, and land use has a very strong vector of shifts that we are able to engage or not towards a lower carbon economy. Just an example, think of the train lines, train stations, and metro stations in many cities around the global south or lower incomes economies. Most of them are idle. Many train stations and train lines were built around and cross cities in high agglomeration areas, but they were not able to densify those areas. This is a huge gap in terms of financing because this is too complex. The concessionaire would not invest the first money to structure those projects. It would want the government, the city government, to structure those projects, and the finance markets would not invest in real estate developments for these areas, for the densification of these areas, because there's no project. This is a huge gap around. This is just an example of where a catalytic capital could jump in. And again, I think the solution needs to be led by commercial banks, by putting together all the capital that is available from development agencies, philanthropies, and everything. But the lead, I understand, needs to come from the commercial sector of the private investing realm. Well, if we come up with the solution for that, I promise you that I would try to put it in the mainstream agenda of COP. But this is a huge challenge. Of course, I understand this is something that we cannot overcome in months. But if it happened that we come up with a I don't know, a fund, a catalytic fund for investment in a portfolio of bankable projects, and we are able to announce, let's make it happen. But I don't think it's something that we will be able to do it in such a small period. But this is something that I would aim for, a catalytic fund with privileged returns for those ones who are bold enough to put the first dollar or the first pound or first real towards more complex projects that are needed for the transition.
Thank you so much, Philip. If we don't create a new fund, but definitely we have a couple that are on the way, right? Like with the Gaia fund that Ariane mentioned, and like the work within Jeff and others and CAF, but like thinking through how we can put out the private sector first. So we're gonna do that homework. Ariane, Alok, Henrique, Josué knows me well. I'm always knocking on his door, and Elizabeth. Let's work together to try to give this answer to Felipe and definitely put out something in the COP agenda. Thank you everyone who stayed with us till now, and particularly thank you all the panelists that joined us and contributed so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
so much. Bye.